All right. So we can call the meeting to order. This is the June 30th Financial Advisory Commission meeting at 7:03 tonight. We just wanted to get together to touch base on a few items that we had outstanding. I saw my previous email about the status of the merger with economic development. Fred has not. There has been no movement on that. So yeah, we can kind of continue take a look at some things. So knowing that now, I just wanted to give folks an opportunity. I know there were some thoughts about potential projects that we could take a look at, or maybe just have a discussion about and see if we like to proceed in some way. And now that we have Kurt as well as Suzanne here, we can ask them some questions and see where some things are. So if anyone has, I know Marianne brought up a point in the most recent email that I think about the impact of COVID-19 on everything. So
yeah,
start there, with that, and we can see what else people want to.
So, I mean, my question was, and again, I'm not sure when the township offices officially open, but I do know from other clients that COVID's definitely affecting operations. And I wondered if there was anything you needed from us, calculations, work, assistance, et cetera, in the face of that. And that's what I wanted to bring up as a potential topic.
Kurt, you're on mute.
No, I wasn't sure who the question was directed to.
Well, I mean, I guess I'll take a stab at it, Marianne. So, Kurt has been giving updates at the board meeting to the extent that there are things that we can track that we believe are associated with COVID or that might be impacted by COVID. And, the last numbers we saw, Kurt, so I don't know if you have any more, if they'll be coming out soon. We were still doing pretty good on things that you thought might be impacted, like home sales were still up, and I can tell you it looks, just following realtor.com, things still look pretty active that way. There are some costs that we are tracking that we are hopeful we'll be able to get to submit through FEMA for reimbursement. Traditionally, that's what FEMA has done. They've allowed townships to put certain costs through that are related to emergencies. So Kurt's, keeping track of the things that we anticipate might be eligible for that, but I don't think there's any specifics on that yet. Kurt, anything else you want to say?
No, so the emergency declaration that we continue to renew is what allows us to apply for reimbursement. The township building, we continue to work remotely, but it is not open. And probably will continue to be that way for a while. We still have processing permits doing that work. We've taken steps. I've actually removed 2 employees' desks that work at the township building and specifically work with the pool and the dog park, and will now be rehoused at the community center so we can space staff when we come back. In regards to finances, not surprisingly, the 2 biggest concerns that we had that have been recurrent themes are the golf course and the pool. So in the end, we made the decision early on, and most public pools have now followed suit, to not open the pool. There were a number of costs associated with opening it that would run into the hundreds of thousands of dollars that in the event membership would not turn out this year out of concern. And, there are some pools that have opened, but like you can be in those pools an hour or so at a time, and then they're pulled out and you have to have reservations. That's not playing so well in places that's happening. I'm sure it would not play well here. So we had made the decision that facing a potential loss of $300,000 to $500,000 that the taxpayers would have had to be the backstop for, that it was wise to be fiscally conservative and that sort, and not open the pool. We do have fixed costs associated with the pool because we share staff amongst various departments, including the pool. So we've scaled back township operations, that there are no part-time employees being hired this year in public works or recreation to mow or do any of the sort of summer work. So full-time staff is handling all of that stuff. We have a certain set aside money for a Memorial Park grant for $250,000 that we put off doing that project for at least a year, and we'll use that matching money that we've set aside as a backstop. As Suzanne also said, we have a number of items that we're tracking. Most of Lower Makefield's taxes, as I said at a board meeting, are not sort of the volatile EIT type taxes that if people are out of work that we can see big swings on. Most of our budget is property taxes. We were seeing comparable collection through the discount period that we saw last year through April, about 100 less households paying this year than last year, so a marginal difference. But the board also extended the face value collection to July 31st this year from June 30th. So I don't think it's really, I can't really make a comparison yet between this year and last year until we get to that face point of July 31st. We have been tracking real estate transfer taxes. They were doing very well and compared to like last year as an example through the first quarter. April still was not that bad. May, as I had expected, was down by about half. That means maybe off about $60,000. But we have this new sewer lateral ordinance that people have to get their lateral inspected before they sell their house. And we're seeing lots of inspections come in. So I'm fully expecting that that June and July, at least as we're seeing, are going to be robust. But the other, to answer the committee's question or your question, Marianne, that you had, so, you know, some of the other taxes that we collect that are not a given are like, or fees, excuse me, that you all have looked at would be, you know, building permit fees. You know, those account for about $800,000 in our budget. And we're tracking right on budget numbers, even with the shutdown that had occurred with construction for those, that about 6 or 8 week period, because activity was so, with a warmer winter that we had, there was lots of people getting permits in the first quarter of this year. So at this point, I hear your request. I don't know that there's much to review. The big saving grace, in my opinion, for the township this year was the golf course. The governor gave that order that golf courses could open May 1st. And the analysis that I had showed that if the golf course opened May 1st, we'd be about 400,000 short at the end of the year, which is not far off what we were anticipating. But then if it would have gone to June 1st, it would have been upwards of a shortage of $800,000. If the opening would have been pushed to July 1st, it would have been about $1.5 million, because those are the busiest months of the year. So the fact that that opened May 1st had this sort of domino effect financially, because as we've talked about, it's the general fund and the taxpayers anytime we have shortages in golf that make that up. So even the board, and it's funny, Suzanne at the time was calling me like in April, even saying, do you think they're going to do May 1st? Because we all knew what those numbers would be if it got delayed. So that really, it's hard to believe that continues to be this sort of central kingpin of a lot of the financial wherewithal of the township, and the fact that that opened. But otherwise, you know, we're not tracking badly. In fact, we've offset a lot of expenses. And I think we're in decent shape. The one unknown is going to be that transfer tax amount, and where property tax collection ends up at the end of the year. We're at 91% collection right now on an aggregate. Typically, we end the year at about 98.5. And this is about where we were last year. We might have been at 92% last year at this time. So, I mean, you know, the interesting thing with property taxes, as we know, is we have 51% of households that have their taxes escrowed as part of their mortgage. So even for someone that lost their job or is in difficult times, many of them would have already had the taxes withheld by the time this hit, and because those taxes were paid in discount. So we'll see. But that's, I don't know if that's enough of an overview, or I probably did talk too much, but that's essentially from a picture where we are financially.
Okay. All right. So, I mean, I guess in terms of any additional help from us right now, you're good.
I certainly do appreciate the offer, and I have no problem if things start getting dicey, tossing you over things to evaluate, to look at, especially with property tax collection or transfer taxes. Like I said, at this point, though, things seem stable.
Hey, Kurt, it's Mark. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. What we lost at the pool, is there a way we can make that up? Or we just kind of now, it's really not as much insignificant as far as trying to make that up, what we lost for the year closing the pool?
Well, I guess it depends. I hear your question, so let me try to specify that.
Yeah.
The fact that we didn't open it offset lots of the loss that we would have had. Had we continued to prep the pool, and we have about 150 employees that we hire that we have to train and get certified as lifeguards, that would have been lots of money. Even filling the pool and the water bill, we didn't do that. So in the end, we still have staff expenses. So for example, I have employees who part of their salary was tagged to the pool and part of those revenues offset it. So two things. One, we didn't hire any part-time employees in recreation this year, which will help us recoup about $50,000. And we didn't do the Memorial Park project for the grant that we had budgeted $250,000. So those two items offset 90% of the costs that we lost or wouldn't be able to recoup or offset. So we've saved most of that already. And, we're doing other cost cutting measures in other areas in Park and Rec, because the pool is tied to Park and Rec to try to make up the difference. So if I had my whiteboards, it's funny, if I did this meeting in my conference room, you'd see my whiteboard says everything with the pool charted on it. I just point my camera at it, but most of that is offset now, which is good news. I think because we identified that early, we took means early by which to scale things back, particularly expenses and projects and things of that sort.
Great. Thanks for that information. Okay. So Fred, I know you mentioned that, that it would be a good time to meet because of stuff that was going on with the sewer. Was that like a project idea, or was that just, that would be something?
I'm sorry, what did you say, David? I didn't.
Oh, so in our email conversation, I was sort of asking for if anyone had any points to discuss. I know, and then I saw in the chain, Fred mentioned that June 30th would be maybe a good time to meet because of the status of the sewer. I don't know if I just wanted to confirm if that was something you wanted to talk about, or just maybe let the wait until another time.
Well, it was a question of whether, since tomorrow night is apparently intended to be a vote on the proposals, the bids to sell or purchase the sewer pipe system. Is there anything that, again, would it be useful or helpful from our position as financial advisors to assist with that, or to provide any input?
I mean, I don't know if I'm supposed to talk to that, but I don't know if you guys have had a chance yet to see what was shared by PFM, which, if I could ask you to do anything, turn it around quickly. Sometimes those numbers are so dense that I think they're hard for average people to follow. But to the extent that they're all there to be seen, right? I don't know that there's a question that someone could ask about what a sale would look like, or what the revenues from that would be, or what the rates would be. Like, it's all there. It's just, sometimes I think it's hard for people to digest it all. So if things happen and we have more time, I don't even know if this is something you guys are interested in doing, but maybe, if it going forward, we could talk about how to help, digest that for people differently. But as you said, Fred, it is scheduled for tomorrow night. So I think instead you're just going to hear me and others trying to, point out the information that's there to be seen and help people interpret it, because it is, keep repeating myself, there's a lot of information, and it's dense, and it's not light reading.
Hey, Suzanne, do you think it's more advantageous if we meet now, we skip the summer, because it doesn't seem like there's a lot on the table for us to discuss, go over, aid in any way? Do you think maybe we should, from after this meeting, not meet until maybe the fall again?
Oh, that's totally not my call. So, and I would say maybe we want to wait and see what happens, and then that might help inform the decision. I can tell you that, obviously if there's nothing to talk about, there's no reason to meet. And yet a lot of the committees, because, we didn't have this technology available right away, and so some meetings were missed in the spring and fall. A lot of the committees that usually don't meet are meeting over the summer, but it's all up to you guys and whatever makes sense to you.
Okay. Well, we can discuss that. I just thought if we're in assistance in any way, or we're helpful in any way, that's one thing. But it doesn't seem that the agenda is really chock full. And I would say, what's the sense of getting together in that case? Unless there's a way we can work together synergistically on some project, but I don't know if that's the case.
Well, again, going back to the sewer side, I agree that there's a lot of information, and it's available online or through the videos of the BOS meetings. But I think, it's suddenly caught up to everybody at this point, or a larger portion of residents than have been really focused on it in the last year or so. And I think that part of the problem is, for example, when the meeting goes on into the late evening and there's numerous slides and discussions and then public comment, it's hard for people to continue to get all that information concisely and understand, in a more concise way, what the premise is for selling and what the whole process has been going on over the past year or more. And I think there's going to be a lot of questions tomorrow, and people are going to need a lot more concise explanation of how we've gotten to this point. And I think, just looking at some of the slides from PFM, I don't know where they went to training for PowerPoint presentations, but I needed some work there.
The meetings are long, right? I mean, before I was on the board, I used to watch them at home, and I realized that part of watching them at home meant that I could tape them, and if I got tired, I could watch the rest of the next day or whatever, or when it was rebroadcast, because it's rebroadcast over and over again, or on the internet. And now that I'm on the board, I don't I don't get to leave my chair until it's over. And there have been plenty of nights on agendas that seemed typical, that we have gone past 11, midnight, whatever. And it is my honor to serve on the board, but it's been really hard the next morning at 4 getting up to go to work. So I hear you, Fred. I hear you. But I also think, we had the meetings. We've had meetings. The good news is they're all there online to watch at your pleasure, even if you don't have cable, because I know some people don't have cable, so they can't, and we get contacted and asked questions by people all the time. So, if people have more questions, I'm sure they'll let us know, because that's always one of the strengths of our community. They know how to get in contact with us, and they let us know what's on their mind. So we'll see. But the nature of the work we do, right? The meetings start at 7:30, and people want to talk about things, and that's important, and they should. But important issues make the meetings go long. So I think you're right, Fred. I think tomorrow night, whatever part of the agenda we get through, it's going to be a long meeting.
Suzanne, if I may, since we have 3 or 4 attentive people here, and since Fred asked the question, may I give a brief overview for at least the people here, are you okay with that?
Oh, sure.
Okay. So I began here in July of 2018. Prior to me beginning, about say 6 to 8 months before, the Sewer Authority and a committee began looking at alternatives for sewers. The Morrisville Municipal Authority that we were involved with was talking about an upgrade to their plant, with Lower Makefield being responsible for a sizable chunk of that capital investment. The committee began looking at a variety of different alternatives that Mr. Ebert, who is the sewage engineer, will be presenting tomorrow night as an overview. I'm sure there'll be lots of questions. So there were 5 alternatives that were looked at. The committee, and through Mr. Ebert, talked to MMA repeatedly about a regional authority that MMA had no interest in pursuing. The township talked to MMA about a cheaper option to just rebuild their plant on their own campus, and they weren't interested in pursuing. It all came down to the township having to invest or participate to the tune of about $50 million, which, after I began here and we began looking at numbers, and everyone's aware of what happened to our sewer rates, would result in a 60 to 70% increase in rates on top of what we've seen. The township looked at many alternatives, including building our own sewage treatment plant, which I'm not sure would be wildly popular in the town, but they felt that that was a necessary thing to check the box. We looked at joining or directing our flow to the Lower Bucks Sewage Authority. That was about $50 million. We looked at converting our flow to Bucks County Water and Sewer. That was $50 to $60 million. Some of those options were, in the end, deemed not viable because there were too many undetermined things that would be left sitting there. So the 3 viable alternatives were $50 million or $48 million to MMA, $50 million to Lower Bucks, or $50 to $54 million for our own treatment plant. So as part of that analysis, and again, there was ongoing discussions with MMA about broadening their base and their customer base to maybe flatten rates a bit because they'd have a bigger customer base. MMA never even budged that they had any interest in doing that. So we started to evaluate a sale, understanding, and I presented to all of you that before, and Suzanne, if you want, I have this ready. I can zip through it in a hurry if you think it's useful for this committee.
You mean the fiscal? Do you guys want to see that? I mean, I know it's up on the page.
It is, but I'm happy to go through this. I've given you enough context. I can talk through this if you want it. But so in the end,
I think just summarize how we got to this point, and without going into the details.
Okay. So in the end, the township basically had outlined what would the goals of a sale be. So in other words, we're going to put this out for bid. What benchmarks do we want to have that we determine that somehow it accomplished something? And those were rate stability. So in other words, if there was a sale, could we have a predictable level of rates that we could convey to the taxpayers, to the ratepayers, that we would exist? Would we have the ability to decrease our debt load to the extent that could have a significant impact of the township? And we've looked and talked about golf debt and sewage debt and what have you. Would we have the ability to restore our fund balance, since we've had a bond downgrade because our fund balance has fallen below what the AA towns or rated towns would have? And could we resolve all the negative cash positions of the sewage authority or the sewage fund that we have that still sits at minus $1.4 million? So those were the criteria for the bids. And I think what was presented at the last meeting was, for the 2 that were presented from a financial standpoint, that they would accomplish those things. That the idea would be, or that was presented by PFM was, so there were two bids that are being evaluated. One is $53 million and one is $56 million. Actually, the recommendation from PFM, if one of those would be selected, is not the highest bidder, but the bid for $53 million, because their rates are about 20% lower than the higher bid. So the idea is if with $53 million, if we took $35 million of that, approximately, it's just a figure, and paid off our debt, restored our fund balance, paid off all the sewer debt or sewer negative balances that we had, we would then use the difference, which is $18 million, and create essentially a rate stabilization fund or a customer benefit fund. That money would be put aside, couldn't be touched, and would be used to give credits directly back to customers over a period of time to keep those rates stable, regardless of where rates went actually, that we could sit and stagger them in such a way that people would generally experience nothing more than a cost of living adjustment. And that analysis basically said that if we set the target that if the first 4 years of your rates were flat, how long could we sustain rates that would never have more than a 3% increase ever? And that answer was 15 years. And keep in mind, under the current analysis with the treatment plant, in about year 5, we're going to experience a 70% increase. So right now, we know our rates are going to be stable for 4 or 5 years if we don't sell, and we're going to have a 70% increase about in year 5. This would be essentially the same equivalent 4-year flat, and then no more than 3% a year for 11 years after that. That was PFM's presentation. So in the end, whether the board elects to sell or not, those were essentially the criteria we were looking to define as specifically as we could with the proposal. They actually both meet it, I think, in the eyes of PFM. Although I think the belief in the end is it's more beneficial for the ratepayers to take the lesser bid than the higher bid, and securing long-term stable rates on your sewer bill. So the summary of sort of how we got there, what we looked at when the bids went out, and generally, very generally, what those results were.
So just one point of clarification. So I understand, because I apologize, but by selling the infrastructure, the pipes themselves that feed into MMA, for example, that avoids then the requirement to participate in MMA's future reconstruction or whatever new plant, whatever they decide to do.
No, it doesn't avoid that. What it does though is that you have Aqua or PA Water, but Aqua was the bid that was discussed, that has a customer base that will be more like 275,000 customers versus our 11,800 customers, that they are able to soften and manage those costs. It's the same, I suppose I would say the same.
I think Fred's asking a slightly different question, though I could be wrong, Fred.
Doesn't avoid MMA. They still would have to pick up and deal with MMA and deal with the treatment plant or other options that may want to consider.
There's no future where, and here comes my accent, there's no future where the sewer treatment plant doesn't have to be dealt with. And the question is really, are we going to deal with it as a group of 12,000, or are we going to be part of a bigger pool? Because changing regulations, federal, state, whatever, the dilapidated state of the treatment plants around here, a new plant someplace has to be built by somebody. And the question is, how much of that has to be shouldered by our residents? So I think that's what you were asking, Fred.
And I'd like to make one more point with that as well, Fred. So I'm not going to, versus getting real far in the weeds, which I'm happy as best I can. The other difference with that ends up being, in my opinion, and I have the slide here, but I won't pull it up to bore you. I mean, in the end, it's not the ratepayers or the taxpayers that are incurring that debt. So while we may be paying it indirectly on a bigger pool, like Suzanne said, I'll go back to the same point. If we keep the system, whether we go with MMA, whether we go with a larger authority that we can try to create, even though no one's expressed interest in doing that when we've reached out to them, our principal and interest will go upwards to $115 million in aggregate debt, which is a staggering amount. And even though some of that's attributed to sewer, it will affect the township's ability to garner much more debt after that, as we're starting to cap out there, as our tax rate is also at the legal limit that we have, that we don't have to go to the Court of Common Pleas to ask for tax increases. So, while that amount still indirectly, I'll say indirectly, still will funnel its way one way or another back to the township, we're not at least holding that note that we're responsible for that would affect other parts of the operation.
Understood. So the as with anything this type of adventure, the devil's in the details, as they say. The bid presentation that I saw showed only a 2-year freeze on rates initially, and you're expecting that this fund would offset eventual rate increases. So, whoever the successful bidder is.
A little distinction there, right? The bid as it went out asked for a 2-year rate freeze. So let's just take Aqua as an example. A PUC company, which they are, they have to make a request to the PUC that has this advocacy group that looks at rates and what they deem acceptable. Aqua's timing for an increase, like Aqua's, if they can go in, will be going back in, I think, in March. So we will miss that. They've been going in every 3 years. So while the quote they had was not for a 2-year rate, was for a 2-year rate freeze, they show a 4-year rate freeze only because of the timing of even when they could go back to the PUC under their legal guidelines, which would essentially amount to a 4-year freeze to LMT ratepayers if Aqua was selected. PA Water shows a 3-year rate freeze because their timing is different than Aqua's would be. I don't know if that's all I have to say about that, unless you had any other questions.
Well, so the bid documents that have already been received, this is agreed upon. That's cast in stone as far as what happens with whoever is, if someone is selected as the successful bidder.
I think what you're asking, Fred, is does the terms of the bid spell that stuff out that Kurt just talked about? So the 2-year freeze, that's a yes. The cycle part is not a yes, but it's just a reality of what happens when you're a publicly regulated utility. So, and then, should the sale go forward, the creation of this customer stabilization fund and how the choice is to leak that money out to help offset future increases is something that's still to be discussed. So, to me, Fred, I can't think about this decision without really doing it like step by step. And the first step is, our pipes and the condition of the lower Makefield pipes and the sewer company that we have been running as a township for 40, 50, 60, however many years you want to call it, and the condition of those pipes today. because it's no secret for, to anybody, or it shouldn't be a secret to anybody, that there hasn't been a lot of investment in maintaining and, just doing the kind of foundational work you would do as a homeowner to keep the pipes and the manholes and the sump pumps and the force, what's the force something? The force, the force main, all those things up to date. I mean, the pump stations are so old, we can't even get parts for them anymore, right? And, we jury rig them. I've been reading minutes since I've been on the board from before I even lived here. And when some of these pipes crack, because some of the pipes, like over in the township closer to, let's say, Morrisville, specifically some of the older sections, the pipes are clay. And when they crack, you have residents coming to meetings talking about sewage coming up through manhole covers. Sewage, I mean, like toilet paper and literally sewage. And because there wasn't money to fix these things, because that's not how the township rolled back then, they would take out short-term loans, rip up the street. That's another loan, another unanticipated expense, fix the pipe, fix the street, and then roll it into, a new bond. And I'm simplifying, I definitely am simplifying, but this is what I have learned from reading all the minutes. And, so that's step one. We have this asset. We want to try to bring it up, no more are we not fixing things, right? Since I've been on the board, sadly enough, we've had rate increase after rate increase because we've had to start doing these big projects, and we've been doing them. But there's a lot more big projects coming our way on just the pipes. Then we have the issue of the treatment plant. And what's that going to look like to the residents of Lower Makefield? And then we have the issue of our debt structure as a township in total. And how do we fix the fact that we don't have, reserves, the downgrade by Moody's already, the way the golf course debt is structured, and you guys know that better than anybody because I know we worked on that, and the payments of the golf course that there's no way out of. People keep saying on Facebook, sell the golf course. That's not really an option because of the way the golf course was taken through eminent domain. The people we can't sell it to Toll, we can't sell it to any big builders like people keep suggesting. It's some nice profit. So we're kind of, stuck with dealing with it. And if we manage our way through, the golf course could become, a profitable entity as was envisioned, but not with the current debt structure. So it's a lot of times when people are talking about these complicated issues, they mush them all into one, and then it becomes very confusing. At least for me, it becomes very confusing. So I would urge you, when you look at it, to think first about how do we fix our sewers? How do we do all the repairs that we need to do? Then think about the treatment plant, and then think about our debt structure and what that means to the residents. Because, I'm very happy that we don't have an earned income tax. I don't want to have an earned income tax. Kurt talked about earlier how some towns with earned income tax have really been hit from COVID because, obviously people have lost their jobs and that's a different type of financial hit. So, anybody who wants to tell you it's just about this one simple thing, that they can narrow this conversation down to some cute buzz phrase and say, do you want this or do you want that, is doing you a disservice in terms of the complexity of this conversation.
Suzanne,
I think to say that having come from a number of public agencies that had 100+ year infrastructure and budget constraints, I'm fully familiar.
I know you are.
But again, just concerned that all the details have been thoroughly looked at, because just thinking back, for example, a small example, the antenna sale. We're getting X amount. And then it turns out, well, yeah, but you only get a fraction of that each year. So, that's, again, the details of this contract, I hope, have been thoroughly vetted.
So Suzanne, that was a terrific, succinct summary, which I need to practice. I really, I never talked about what I'm about to say much. I think I need to. When I was in Newtown, everyone knows, and I don't like to I was in Newtown. There was a county-wide of any development, any new development across Bucks County, because DEP said the system is in such rough shape that towns need to now do upgrades because lots of towns had neglected to update their sewers. The environmental impact of that, essentially, like Suzanne has said before, right? There's infiltration, sewage spills over into the rivers. So every town was shut down. I was one of a group of managers that went to DEP because DEP said you need to do all of these things to start to be able to give building permits again, or for people who need to add flow, like if they're building a house. So part of that discussion, frankly, was with myself and 3 other managers in Bucks County saying, frankly, you can't treat us like Lower Makefield. We've spent millions and millions and millions of dollars on our system, and the repairs that you're asking us to do, Lower Makefield to do, we've already done, and here's all the paperwork for it. DEP agreed. DEP allowed Middletown to start building again, Northampton to start building again, Newtown, and several others. I'm giving away my fellow managers that participated in that. Lower Makefield was not allowed to start building again until this board and Suzanne, who came on, got what's called the 537 plan passed in 2019. 6.5 years later, that these other towns were allowed to have houses built and projects done. The only ones in Lower Makefield that were allowed to be done were projects that were approved or part of a consent decree prior to that order being done. So again, I'm not here to but the evidence of the fact that we hadn't really invested in our system was the fact that Lower Makefield was I think the only town, there might've been one other, that were shut down that way for lack of investment in the system. DEP required towns to go in and show what they had done and present in terms of a plan. This town just hadn't done anything for whatever reason, and really couldn't open it up until when did we approve that? In October or November of last year. So this whole time, 7 years. So in the end, it's sort of the deficit that we're going in terms of how much work on the system needs to be done. We have neighboring towns that literally have spent tens of millions of dollars on their system, but have done it over a period of years. In Newtown, they were working on the system in the borough and the township since the early 2000s, $200,000 a year, $300,000 a year, lining the pipes, updating the pump stations. We have a pump station that Suzanne and the board just approved to be upgraded, that the well is literally popping out of the ground, and we've had raw sewage spill on the street. It's 50 years old. 50 years old. And a lot of these pump stations have a lifespan of 15 to 20. It's every one we have in the township. And it's unfortunate. All of these circumstances are all sort of coming to a head all at once. The sewer rates, the debt, the golf course, the fund balances. But it's sort of like, we've sort of gone to the cliff and maneuvered everything we can. And now the credit cards are maxed out. The rates are as high as they're going to go. And it is a complex issue that's not just about sewers. It's not just about golf. It's the culmination of all of those things. But I hear your point, Fred, that antenna sale, unfortunately, the way that was structured prior to me getting here was done in such a way that it was a lease that I know after I started, I brought the auditors in and said, I don't think we can recognize all this money. And they agreed. And that would have just, my opinion was the board did not get good counsel on that from the financial people that we had working on that. That's all. Believe it or not, that's all I have.
Thanks, Kurt and Suzanne. That was very informative. Thanks.
All right. Well, yeah. Thank you for the information also.
Guys, can I add one more thing?
Yeah.
Oh, not that I not always have something else to add. Whenever the time comes regarding economic development, and I know I always have something to say about something. You know, before I became a manager, I was a director of development, and I did consulting work, and I was the director of a town and development that did projects and performance and all of these things. So, you know, if there's going to be a discussion about merging with economic development at some point, you know, my goal would be that your time could be well spent, right? I think that's the goal is that there's something we can work on. And I have some ideas about that, and that will eventually involve some discussion about what the township wants you all to examine. You know, when you look at performance on sites, and you know, part of that's going to be if you're evaluating a company or something I used to do hotels, so we'd evaluate sites and where does it make sense, but you'd also have to have a willing township that if the township doesn't want what you're evaluating, it can be wasted time. But, you know, I think that there's a way to evaluate potential sites and the economic impact of those sites that both involve a component of the likelihood that business could come, and from you all, a financial analysis on what that site would cost to develop, how that could run, what the taxes would be. And, you know, in a lot of those towns, then what package would have to be to put together to bring someone to that site. And, you know, again, I'm going to say a controversial subject here. In lots of places that are built out the way Lower Makefield is, to get the tenant or the client you want, oftentimes it can involve incentives. There's a variety of incentives out there. Even though they closed, Lockheed Martin came to Newtown from incentives. And it brought the township a significant amount of money. In 10 years, Lockheed Martin contributed $70 million, or that's not right, $45 million to Newtown's coffers over time, in property taxes and in wage taxes and you know, and secondary impact. So it's just a matter of, you know, what you all want to look at, the board's willingness to let you all or the committee be creative with things that could be controversial. And I'm certainly happy to give my 2 cents worth, having done that before.
Okay, great. So did anyone else have any other thoughts or ideas to discuss at this time? And we can talk about how to proceed.
I think it just goes back to Mark's question about meetings.
Yes. Yeah. Did you have anything to add, Marianne?
No, I didn't have anything more to say, but I do agree on terms of the meetings. Maybe we, at least for the summer, look at maybe scaling the meetings, maybe not one in July, or, you know, maybe one in August. I mean, what do you think?
Yeah, that was my thought. You know, maybe to try every other month. But since, you know, August is a summer month also, you know, possibly we could maybe just look to meet again in September. I could, you know, ask if they're see where we are with Fred on the merger. At that point, he was saying, you know, in the next couple of months, to see if there's an update on that, and then just do a general, you know, if anyone at that point has something to talk about, or you know, in those months in between now and September or August, you know, we can look at that point. So does anyone, would you guys just like to meet again and you know, try maybe every other month if there's items, and if not, we can cancel and then just go from there? Or
David, I was thinking that more along the lines that, since we're not a lot of us have vacations planned, or can we go too far? I mean, I would think that the summer months we'll try to take in what we can with some family, whatever. So maybe we, like you said, maybe we should just go into September and start when the fall comes and see where we're at, one, with what's going on, and then where we're at with any major projects. the summer, I can't foresee, unless something came up that was of importance, where we would have to come back to a meeting or have this kind of meeting again in August, unless something came up really of importance. But other than that, in a general session, I would just say, let's hold off till September and see where we're at both ends with what's going on, where we're at, and where we're at with projects.
Okay.
What do you think?
That sounds good. How do Fred and Mary Ann, do you guys agree?
And then the other thing
fine, unless, I'm sorry.
No, I was going to say the other thing is, go ahead. I was just going to say the other thing is, David, where we're at with our terms. I think our terms start to run in consecutive, years, and only certain point at time that we're going to come up and say, can we continue, or any changes coming? That's all for the future.
Yeah. I mean, we'll just see. We'll see how that goes. But yeah, I guess for at least the end of the year, maybe one or two things before that,
correct.
Made, and then we'll just go.
Yeah, play it by ear, right?
Kurt, you don't have to stay to hear us debate whether or not we're going to meet.
Yeah.
Sure,
So,
that's fine.
have a good night.
Thank you.
Thanks for your time.
Appreciate it.
Bye, Kurt. Thank you. Stay safe.
Yeah. Okay.
Does Barbara, does she know what each of our terms are? Or I have to dig out the letter that I got.
Yeah.
Oh, I think you're all safe till December, is my memory, and then it may be.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. We'll just see at that point.
Okay.
Yeah, I would think, probably for the end of the year, I would think one or two possible more times to meet. And then, we'll just see from there. And,
Sure. Yeah. And I think September's good. Like you said, September would be good because I can't
Because
foresee
we'll be all back together then. We can be.
yeah.
You think
Also-
you think we'll be in the building, Suzanne? You think we'll meet at the building?
Hope springs eternal.
Yeah, too. Yeah. Okay. Fingers crossed.
Okay. So we'll look at September. We'll see what what our status is. If we have to pick a week.
If we have to wear masks, we'll meet at the building as long as we can get in.
Sure.
All right.
Yeah. And if anyone has anything, in the meantime that you'd like to call to discuss, we can definitely take a look at that once we see the results of these.
Well, like Suzanne said, in all the 50 years that things have been going on, probably not much is going to change from now until September. 50 years with the sewers and everything else. So how much can change, right? Unless all around the area, the big leaks occur. I know. Shh. But you guys have to handle that. You'll be up till midnight. No problem.
All right. Well, sounds good. If there's no other items, is there anyone looking to make public comment out there? Anyone?
No.
Okay. Thanks. So if that's it, could I have a motion?
Motion to adjourn.
Good night and God bless.
Be
We'll
well,
take that as a
everybody.
second.
There you go.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.